welcome back to Truck Tech, everyone. It's a great afternoon, a little rainy here in Michigan. But listen, one of the best things about having a TV show like FreightWaves Truck Tech is the opportunity to step back and look at stories that, maybe we've written about and maybe even a few weeks ago. And we did that with the subject of today's show, which was the announcement by Loadsmith that it was going to buy up to 800 of the Kodiak driver systems, autonomous trucking systems from Kodiak Robotics. And we're really fortunate today to have both Don Burnette, the CEO of Kodiak, as well as Brett Suma, the CEO and founder of Loadsmith, on the show. We're going to bring them on in just a couple minutes and kind of pick up where that story left off a few weeks ago and sort of look at, kind of what's happening. Maybe not a lot has changed, but it's a great opportunity to engage both of them on that. Before we do that, I just have a couple of headlines for you. Interestingly enough, we are looking again at the idea of electric battery swapping. This is something we mentioned last week in the Truck Tech newsletter about Photon Daimler, the joint venture in China, was that they were going to start working on swapping out batteries for electric trucks over there. It's a small project at this point, but something that I had the opportunity to ask Daimler about, and they said, well, it's really not something that we think is going to be big. And they're still saying the same thing. But then this week we find out that Ample, which is a California company, said that they're going to start doing battery swapping on a pilot basis with Mitsubishi Fuso in Japan. Now, interestingly, Mitsubishi Fuso is about 89% owned by Daimler. Again, Daimler says, Fuso makes its own decisions about what it wants to do. And, there's a little more interest right now in Asia than there is in the U.S. for battery swapping, at least on the truck side. But this was worth noting. Also, we see this week that PACCAR and Toyota are advancing a little bit anyway on the plan to use fuel cells from Toyota in PACCAR trucks. It was mentioned during the earnings call yesterday by Preston Fate, the CEO of PACCAR, and he just said that they're advancing the work they're doing. Now, I don't think anything's really changed much, but they are looking at the first of the fuel cells, the second generation fuel cell from Toyota, going into Kenworth and Peterbilt trucks as soon as late this year. That means that you could see, in 2024, not this year. That means you could see the return of Kenworth and now Peterbilt fuel cell trucks, which Kenworth had a project with Toyota for a couple of years that ran in the ports out around Los Angeles. These would be commercial units. Preston Fate puts it somewhere in the hundreds of units. So let's see what happens there. Finally, this week, we see that Cummins is not forgetting its roots. Cummins is an engine maker, first and foremost. They spent a lot more time in the last year or so talking about New Power and now what they call Acela, which is their rebranding of the New Power division that works on electrolyzers for making hydrogen and is taking a big chunk of the business from Meritor that Cummins purchased last year to make fully integrated electric chassis. But this is the traditional business, and there's a big number associated with it, $347 million that Cummins is getting from the U.S. Army to do certain engines, both on new and remanufactured engines for the Department of Defense. This program or this contract lasts out through 2028. And it is interesting that Cummins apparently was the only bidder for it. So good for them. Okay, let's get on to the show. I'm really happy. Don Burnette's been on our airwaves many times, and we're happy to have him back. I think Brett Suma probably has been on as well, not with me. So guys, thanks very much for coming on Truck Tech today. Uh-oh.
Alan, thank you for having us. I don't know if Don, we can hear you.
Don, can we hear you? Check your fire, buddy. He's always better when you can hear him. Uh-oh, he just left. Brett, we're going to talk. Listen, I'm really glad to have you guys. It was just a few weeks ago that you announced this pretty big deal. And I think, Brett, one of the bigger deals that you put forward, certainly your arrangement with Wabash for all these trailers, 6,000 trailers, I think it is, that you plan to get from them. But maybe you could just give us, or give the audience, a bit of a read on your digital brokerage, where it came from and things like that. Just a quick summary, maybe.
Yeah, I think when we started Loadsmith, we really felt that we could build a business, in about 4 or 5 different building blocks. One of them was to just build a network of freight. The second was to build a tech stack that could optimize that freight, deliver that freight to our carriers. Fourth was, well, I guess third-ish, fourth-ish was then bringing in an agreement with Wabash on trailers. It's a significant agreement for us, significant for our customers. And then being able to partner with Don and Kodiak to kind of close the entire loop of what our ecosystem is going to be, from a very powerful first and last mile local job position to an autonomous middle mile, deploying 6,000 trucks and 6,000 trailers and 800 trucks in that network of freight that we've designed.
Well, you've got to be considered a leader right now. We haven't heard of anybody doing anything quite as extensive. There's been some talk, and obviously, your first partner in this was Too Simple, and we can talk about that in a moment. But they had signed up a lot of reservations for trucks and things like that. They're now looking at significant strategic alternatives, I think they call it, for what to do with the U.S. business and whether to stay in or not. But it's interesting that no one has come out and said they're going to do what you're doing at this point. That's either very, very brave or something that maybe others just want to watch and see. What do you think's happening there?
Well, when I first started and launched Loadsmith with my partners, most people thought we were crazy because we had no freight brokerage experience. We hadn't really, showed our hand at that point. And at the time, I was told by a really heavily influential person in our business that we were 5 years too late to the freight brokerage game, meaning that he felt that we had missed our window to start a freight brokerage. Now, of course, he didn't know what our plans were. Incidentally, that same individual, when our announcement came out about autonomous, told us that we were about 5 years too early for that. So I feel like I'm 5 years too late and 5 years too early. I feel like I'm right on time. We feel we're right on time. We feel that, and when I hear people say, "Oh, it's not until the end of the decade," I say, "Well, you only have 7 years." There's a lot that has to be done in order for us to be ready. Not to mention all of the work that has to be done in the regulatory environment, and then on the technology side, and Don and his team. We have to do a tremendous amount, and so we don't feel like we're early. We don't feel like we're behind, though. And so that we feel like we're in a great spot because we're not late to the party, and we're actually probably a little bit ahead.
Well, you've got a lot of background. I see Don's back with us. Don, speak. Tell us if you're here. Are you really here?
Yeah, I'm here now. Can you hear me?
Easy. Perfect. Yes.
I feel like I missed
half
the conversation.
No, it's just a couple questions. We'll get you. We'll get to you in a minute. Brett, I just want to ask you, though, one of the things that you did all those years at night before you started this business was obviously worked on routes and knew about routes and knew what the routes were and things like that. Can you provide any kind of preview on what makes a lot of sense? Now, Don, you're running in Texas right now, and that's presumably where you'll start when you do get to driverless. But Brett, where are the routes that make the most sense in terms of running middle mile, hub to hub kind of things?
Well, if we really wanted to get geeky, I could turn the computer around to show you the spreadsheet that's in front of me. But we have been working on and building the Loadsmith freight network for the deployment of autonomous. When you look at lanes that are viable autonomous lanes, they have to have some characteristics in regard to density. They have to have characteristics that work from a technology perspective. And so Don and his team, special shout out to Raj, who I love working with at Kodiak, on lanes and an understanding of lanes. So our lanes have to work from a density perspective. They have to work from a unit economic perspective. And then from Don's perspective, they have to work from the technological, of course, and then also the regulatory. So there's a bunch of different things that have to occur. Now, my particular viewpoint on the deployment of autonomous, and you can accomplish it in a lot of different ways. And every time I have a meeting with Kodiak and their team, we uncover more ways to automate segments. But really, it comes down to what is the optimization of the network, what is the utilization ability of the truck, and then how do you back into that? And then after you figure that out, you can decide, well, do the unit economics work, depending on, where we end up from a cost basis perspective. And so from my perspective, an 8-2 split is about the perfect length of haul time in order for the truck to be optimized. And what I mean by that is running for 8 hours and then 2 hours in between. That would put you at a length of haul roughly around 400 plus or minus. Now that's an average. So you're going to have some lanes that are less and some lanes that are more. You're going to have the ability to relay along the network as well. And so it gives us a ton of optionality. But when I look at what the uptime opportunity of the truck is going to be, I look at it as an 8-2. So when you're thinking about that in terms of in the course of a day, you're breaking essentially up the truck's utilization in 10-hour components. So there are some lanes that are, really conducive to this. And then there's others that we have to look at, and how do we pull the network apart and then build it back together. Throw a lane off my head.
Yeah, let me ask you, Brett, before I get to Don, I presume density has a lot to do with that. You don't want to be running something, once or even twice. You want to keep these lanes flowing back and forth and just keep a lot of freight moving, I'm sure, right?
Density and unit economics are the most important components.
Okay, great. Don, welcome back. Good to have you. Listen,
It's great to be here, Alan. I'm so glad I get to be part of the conversation.
And you shall. I'm not going to cheat you, I promise. Let me ask you, Don. This is again one of the bigger. I cover the space. That this is one of the bigger announcements that I've seen, and it's why we wanted to do the show. How did it come together? I know Brett's got some pretty interesting thoughts, but you really weren't directly involved originally, were you?
Not originally. I mean, Brett was meeting with the broader team. We have a great commercialization team. Michael Wiesinger is heading up our commercialization route. I know he had some conversations with James. We actually met at the Stiefel conference back in January of this year. So we were pretty involved pretty early on. I was involved pretty early on, and we've always been excited about the vision that Brett has had for his network, and just really excited to be a part of it.
You, Brett, you mentioned that James Reed joining Kodiak was a big part of this for you. I mean, you were kind of a fan of his when he was at USA Truck, and sort of him being at Kodiak was what? I'll let you describe it.
Well, James and I have lived in parallel worlds for probably 20 years, meaning we never met but knew of each other. After I met James, come to find out he was really good friends with my brother-in-law at one point when they used to live in the same neighborhood. So he and I have lived in parallel. And in the trucking world, when you live in parallel and then you get into the room together for the first time, all of a sudden you start talking, and it's almost like your brains just become one. And I think that's what really happened with James and I when we met for the first time at Manifest in Las Vegas. And then subsequently the following week, we're at the Stiefel conference where I got to meet Don. And Don and James and Michael were gracious enough to invite me to have dinner with them. And we just talked. And once we started talking, he probably couldn't get me to shut up about network design. But when it just made so much sense in regard to how we were thinking about things and then how Kodiak was thinking about things.
Right. So, Don, I've asked you this before, and I think your answer is probably going to be very similar, if not the same. You're a consistent guy. But when you get to doing up to 800 Kodiak drivers for Brett, that requires a certain level of sort of automotive grade quality. You're not going to be making these in your own shop and, churning them out like elves in Santa's workshop. This is something that, one of your competitors, who is still pretty viable, signed on with Continental, for hardened software and hardware, I guess. What are you? What's your thinking? I mean, you're talking to people. What are you doing about making sure that you've got, automotive grade?
Well, if you know any elves who can help out, we always appreciate additional help at the company. But more seriously, we've been working at this for many years, and we've driven over 2 million miles with our system. As you know, we work very closely with the tier 1 suppliers in the industry, folks like Bendix and ZF and Cummins on the engine side and others. We design our own safety critical control compute. So we have designed our own compute system in-house, the one that's responsible for the safety envelope of the vehicle. But of course, we have contract manufacturers that we work with. We haven't announced them by name, but we have contract manufacturers that we work with that build up our units, that install these units on the truck, that outfit our trucks today. So even today, we're not building things in-house, even as we do R&D, and we're looking to scale that with contract manufacturers going forward. So we feel like we're on a really good path. We're 5 generations into the design and testing of our system, and that gives us a lot of experience to be able to put out a product that is going to be reliable. It's going to have the redundancy necessary, et cetera. So,
you know that there are voices in this industry, in the autonomous space and at OEMs and so forth, that say the quote unquote only way to successfully do what you're doing is to have an OEM partner on the redundant chassis. We've talked about this before. I know what you're going to say, but I want the audience to hear it too. Is that critical or not?
It's absolutely critical. At the end of the day, this is a technology that can only get to scale through the OEMs. And what I've always said is that in the long run, OEMs are going to provide the virtual drivers that the customers are asking for. And if you actually talk to folks in the industry, like Brett we have on this call, I think there's a compelling demand for the Kodiak driver system. And ultimately, I believe that the Kodiak driver will be offered on numerous OEM platforms. The question is really about timeline. It takes a long time to get this type of technology onto an OEM platform, onto an assembly line where you can just order it from the factory. And the fact of the matter is, we're several years away from that, I believe. And so we have been always working on an independent, fully redundant path, and we think that that's the right way to get started. And ultimately, this technology will be available on OEM platforms.
Brett, when you were working with Too Simple, they were partners at the time with Navistar and with International. They were looking at, working on an international LT to basically become the fully redundant chassis. That work ended last year. They went their separate ways, as did you. I mean, you moved over to Kodiak as your partner. Is Navistar, since it doesn't have anybody right now, are they a good candidate to sort of be that redundant chassis for you, Don?
I think they're a great candidate. Like I said, I think we'd ultimately expect to be available on all of the OEM platforms because the demand is going to be driven by the industry itself. The demand is going to be driven by the customers. I'm not sure, I can't speak for Navistar specifically, but we definitely are in contact with them. We've had communications and conversations with them, and obviously we continue to work through our OEM and tier 1 supplier plan as we go. We don't have anything to announce on the air today, but absolutely, I think Navistar has done a lot of work clearly with the Too Simple team, and they've been working at it for many years. And I think that they're definitely a viable platform for a virtual driver like the Kodiak driver.
Okay. Guys, this one comes to both of you because as private businesses, you don't have to tell us anything, and you probably won't, about finances. But Brett, you said that you sort of started your business with some family money and things like that. Don, you've had a couple of rounds, an A round and a B round. Give me a sense, because I ask everybody that comes on the show that isn't, a legacy auto company, or trucking company, how's your runway looking? Where are you? Do you have what you need? And Don, let's start with you, because it's been since 2021 since, Pilot backed your B round.
Absolutely. Well, I'll give you my typical answer is we don't talk about unannounced financing, as you know. I would say we're in a very strong position, right? Just because we haven't announced fundraising doesn't mean we haven't been fundraising or we haven't brought in additional capital. There's always, strategies involved in those kinds of announcements. But, you just saw last week, Aurora raised $820 million in the public markets. I think that's a fantastic sign. I mean, hats off to Aurora for extending their own runway. Obviously, they have a significantly higher burn than we do, and so we don't need or require that type of capital to get to where we're going. But we will need to raise more. I think it's a great sign that the public markets are willing to support this technology. I think that's a great sign for private investors who are interested in Kodiak. So no official plans to announce anything today, but we're definitely keeping a mindful eye, and we feel like we have the sufficient runway to get to our goals, to get to driverless, and to ultimately deploy this.
Brett, 6,000 trailers cost a fair amount of money. What are you doing?
Well, I mean, I think first we have to remember that Loadsmith is a standalone profitable business, and we have been since day one. So the fact that we operate a profitable business, and then our ability to do that in a very measured way. I think one of the things that I appreciate most about Don and his team is their capital efficiency. I would say that Loadsmith shares in that from a capital efficiency perspective, so for our plans, look, we have made very calculated, deliberate partnerships with various different people. And our agreement with Wabash, 6,000 trailers is a lot of trailers, there's no doubt. But it's a very, very good agreement for Loadsmith and ultimately for our customers and ultimately for the drivers that are hauling those trailers. They're beautiful trailers, and I love seeing them when I'm on the 70 and they're driving. I love seeing them. It brightens up my day every day I see one. But from a capital efficiency perspective, we're going to continue to build a profitable business. And part of that is going to be to continue to push the envelope in regard to what does the future look like and how can we build into that future and really be first building into that, which is why we've made such a bold move with Kodiak. And to your point, 800 is a big number. I think that's a small number in the grand scheme of things. I hope Don is happy to hear that, but I think that number is just the starting place for us. And we look to have a very, very long relationship with them. And, will Loadsmith at some point in time raise money? Perhaps we will. It just depends on how quickly we want to get to where we're going. For right now, we have a lot of work that we can be doing that's not capital intensive. And so we can just continue to build our business, build our network. Really for us, it's one salesperson at a time. So every business development person that we're able to go out, and we have very high standards in terms of that.
Sure.
But when we go out and find the right person that wants to come in and understand from what our strategy is and help build our freight network, that's all we have to continue doing is what we've been doing. We have to build along the way, but Don's not ready for us today. And so that's what I was alluding to earlier is that we have a tremendous amount of work that we need to be doing on our side as well in order to be ready for it.
Okay, guys, we've got, call it 20 seconds each if you can do this. Give me your read on where the shakeout in autonomous is right now. Don, I'm going to start with you, okay?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time in autonomous, particularly autonomous trucking, right? You had Embark shutting down. You have TuSimple announcing just a couple of weeks ago that they're going to be selling off their U.S. assets to focus on the China market. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that while we've been on this call, Waymo actually just announced that they're officially shutting down their trucking program. Of course, there were some rumors about that for the last several months, and that really leaves Kodiak and Aurora out in front in terms of the AV trucking companies that have made substantial progress. We think that's a testament to the quality of team that we've built and the quality of product that we put out in the market, right? It's the customer service that we offer our partners and the way that we approach this industry. We don't know everything. We rely on our partners to learn how to build this product the right way to meet their needs. And that really resonates. So I think we build superior technology. People can see that when they experience it. And at the end of the day, I think Kodiak is really at the forefront of this industry, and we're here to stay.
Okay, well, I'll check on that Waymo thing and see if you're right. Guys, I don't have more time today. Thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate it. Next week, folks, we will be back with a new show. You can find us. Our new home now is the FreightWaves channel at YouTube. You can do a playlist and find all the Truck Tech episodes. This is our 25th today, so we're very happy about that. It's kind of a nice milestone for us. Again, my thanks to Don Burnette and Brett Suma. We'll see you next week.